Hi, I'm Andy with the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District in northwest New Mexico. In this Backyard Conservation Workshop video, we're going to take a look at an introduction to soil health. First, I would like to thank Bonnie Hopkins and our local county extension office for letting us use these slides, along with John Ito of the Extension Plant Sciences at NMSU. So, what is healthy soil? This is not it. This soil is bare, naked, hungry, thirsty, and it is hot. This is not happy soil. When we don't manage our soil's health, we can lose a lot of it just to erosion from wind and rain. Before we look at soil health, we have to look at what is soil in the first place. Well, soil can be a lot of things to different people. It can be what's underneath your home and the foundation. It can be industrial or animal waste. But the Soil Sciences Society of America says the unconsolidated mineral or organic material on the immediate surface of the earth that serves as a natural medium for the growth of land plants is soil. So what is soil health? Well, here's a few different descriptions or definitions of soil health. And I particularly like the second one: capacity of the soil to function in a productive and sustained manner. Why do I like that one? Well, not only should healthy soil be productive, but it's sustainable, and it will keep being productive as long as you maintain the health of that soil. So when we look at soil health, we have to look at three different components: chemical, biological, and physical. All three of these components are critical when maintaining a healthy soil. When looking at physical, we're looking at the aggregation and structure, surface sealing, compaction, porosity, water movement, and availability. When we're looking at the chemical, we're typically looking at the pH, the soluble salts, sodium, nutrient holding capacity, and nutrient availability. When we're looking at the biological component, we're looking at macro and microfauna, microorganisms, roots, biological matter, or biological activity, and organic matter. So how much does each of one of these take up? Well, the mineral portion, basically those physical components, which is your sand, silt, and clay, makes up your soil texture. That's about 45%. This is for a healthy soil, about 45% of your soil. And your organic matter, if you're really, really lucky and you have very healthy soil, should be around 5%. Here in New Mexico, we're thrilled if we can get just 1 or 2%. And if you're hitting 3%, you're doing outstanding. Then the other 50% is basically pore space, which will be filled up by water and air. As you water the field or water your garden, the pore space will be taken up more by water. And as it drains and evaporates, that'll be replaced with air. So let's look at the different parts of the soil. We have different horizons or layers of the soil. Your O horizon is basically your very, very top couple inches, your organics. That's the O stands for organic horizon, your O horizon. And that is that, and then the next few inches is your most active portion of the soil, and that's your topsoil. Typically, the top foot of your soil is where all of the nutrients, or at least most of the nutrients, are going to be stored, and the organic matter will be active. So below your topsoil, you have your subsoil, which is composed of your B horizons, which is basically broken down parent material. The roots of some plants will go down into that layer. And then below that, you have your basically parent material. So why do we care about soil health? Well, soil health is directly related to productivity. Unhealthy soil is going to reduce yields, require more inputs to produce given yield, increase susceptibility to pests and diseases, it'll be more likely to erode and cause environmental hazards, and it's more expensive to manage. So let's take a closer look at those physical issues. Your soil texture is your relative distribution of sand, silt, and clay. Your soil structure or aggregation is how well that soil binds together. Your soil density is how tightly the soil is packed together, basically how much pore space you have. For soil texture, we're looking at the percent of sand, silt, and clay in the soil. Sand are very large grains, everything from 2 to 0.05 millimeters. Your silt is then much smaller at 0.05 to 0.002 millimeters. And then your clay is absolutely tiny. It's less than 0.002 millimeters inside. Typically, silt and clay cannot be seen with the naked eye. You need some type of microscope to be able to see the silt or clay. So why do we care about soil texture? Well, the soil texture is the single most important physical property of the soil. And knowing your soil texture alone will provide information about your water's drainage, water holding capacity, aeration, susceptibility to erosion, organic matter content, soil fertility potential, and soil tilth. How do you determine your soil texture? Well, you can take a sample of your soil and send it off to a lab for analysis, usually not too expensive, between $25 and $50. And you can also do a little bit of a texture by feel. There's a flowchart available at the website there, which is also linked in our description below. Along with, if you search for NRCS soil texture by feel, you'll come up with a video. It's just a couple minutes long on how to test the soil texture yourself to get at least a rough idea of the texture of your soil. No pun intended. When we're looking at soil texture, we're basically looking at the percent of sand, silt, and clay. So once we know our percentages, so you've either sent it off to a lab or you've done the hand texture test, then you should have a rough idea of the percent sand, percent silt, and percent clay. All of that combined should equal 100%. And then you look at this chart to determine what type of soil you have. Percent sand, you follow going up to the left with the red arrow. Then percent clay, you follow over to the right with the black arrow. And percent silt, you follow down to the left with that green arrow. You find where those three lines intersect, and you look at the section or area behind it, and that tells you the type of soil that you have. A 40% sand, 40% silt, and 20% clay would be a loam soil. So what is soil structure? Soil structure is the arrangement of soil particles into aggregates of different shapes and sizes. So with that, we need to look at what is the distribution of aggregates, how stable are the aggregates, and what is the configuration of the pores. Another important aspect of your physical properties is your aggregation, or basically how your sand, silt, and clay are all packed together and formed to make clumps. The organic matter is the glue that holds those aggregates together, and hopefully you'll have both large and small pore spaces between your different particle sizes to allow air and water to flow through. So this is a conceptual diagram of a macroaggregate showing that the brown or plant and fungal material is holding or gluing together those silt and clay-sized particles. And then you also have plant roots, fungus, and other things all clumping that aggregate together. So this here is a little demonstration that can show you just how well your soil has aggregated and clumped together. We want our soil to hold together when it's in water so it doesn't break down and wash away and cause erosion. On the left, we have a loam that had a permanent cover of fescue, meaning it was not tilled. And then on the right, we have a loam that was conventionally tilled. When you place them in the water, the one on the left that had not been tilled and had the roots and all that fungus and all the good stuff holding that soil together, it holds it together even when there's water inundating those pore spaces. However, once you till your soil, that breaks up that aggregate and it causes the soil to basically just mineralize and wash away and just turn to that sand, silt, and clay particles, and it can just get washed away. You lose that aggregate formation. Another important part of the physical properties of soil health is the soil density and soil compaction. If you have surface crusting, that can prevent seeds from germinating and sprouting above that top layer of soil. If you have deeper down compaction, it can prevent water from infiltrating and draining through your soil and can also cause root problems by preventing roots from penetrating down further into the soil. There's a couple ways you can test your soil compaction or density. One is with a penetrometer, which basically you press down into the ground, and depending on how much pressure it takes to push down, tells you how compacted your soil is. Or you can also just dig with a shovel. If you're digging down and everything comes out really nice and easy, then it's got a lot of pore space and it's not very compacted. If you're digging and it feels like concrete and you need a breaker bar to break it apart, you've probably got some pretty compacted soil. So how do you solve compaction? Well, it's really tough, but there's some things that you can do to help improve it. While we want to minimize tilling, if you're just starting out and you have really hard compacted soil, it might be necessary to do a light till to at least loosen up that topsoil so that your seeds will at least germinate and start growing. And you can also plant certain plants or crops that will have deep, large roots, such as forage radish and forage turnips. And those will push down into your soil, and it's called biodrilling. And this here is an example of a tillage radish. It's actually a crop that you grow throughout the fall, winter, and spring. And as it grows, it pushes those roots down into the soil and breaks up the compaction. Then if you leave it there, it also breaks down and puts more organic material into your soil. So the second important aspect to soil health was soil chemistry, because we need to make sure that there are sufficient nutrients for the plants and that our salinity or salt levels are low enough, and that we're irrigating with healthy water that is not going to be adding or causing problems in our field or garden. Here in New Mexico, some of our most common soil chemical issues are high pH, salt and mineral accumulation, lack of nutrients, and excessive chemical nutrient application, basically putting too much fertilizer on. Particularly if you add too much nitrogen, it can result in rapid and weak growth from overstimulation or too much nitrogen. There are some strategies for addressing high pH. If it gets too high, it can actually prevent plants from absorbing certain minerals. Above 8.5, you probably want to work on amending the soil. Potential deficiencies in zinc, iron, and phosphorus can occur. You could use costly sulfur applications that temporarily remediate, but you should look more at the source of the problem and what's causing the high pH. Below 8.4, it's not really worth fighting here in New Mexico. Just increase your organic material or organic matter and select what plants will grow well in those high pH soils. As for strategies for addressing salinity or too much salt, you can leach the salts from the soils by flood irrigating and pushing or basically flooding those salts down deeper into the soil. Keep in mind you'll also be flushing through a lot of nutrients and you may need to address that something else. You can also do a pre-plant irrigation to again kind of pull those salts further down into the soil. Depending on your bed forming and seed placement, often the salts occur at the peaks of the mounds. So some people out here will plant their rows or their crops just off center or slightly down sloped from the top of the mounds or the rows, so that the salt accumulates at the very top where the plant is a little bit further down. Residue management can also help, or the amount of organic matter you leave on the surface of the soil. Alternating good and bad water quality. If you know that you have bad water coming from somewhere, but you have a source of good water, but it might be a little more expensive, alternating those water sources so that you're not only using the lower quality water. Also, a more efficient irrigation system. The less water you're putting onto the land, the less minerals you're going to be adding to, or the less minerals and salts you're going to be adding to that land. And also selecting for tolerant plants. Like I said, select plants that are more saline adapted. So these are the 16 essential elements for all plants to grow. From the air and water, they're getting carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And then from the ground, they're getting everything else. So managing all 16 of those elements is key in proper soil health. Well, we're not going to go over the specific details of each of those elements in this video. You can go to this website here, which is also linked below. They have a very good explanation and pictures showing examples of what happens when you have too much or too little of any one of those nutrients. So, how can you resolve other chemical issues? Well, the first and foremost important part of resolving chemical issues in your soil is testing your soil. Make sure you get it tested for a nutrient and chemical analysis, and that'll tell you what is too much, what's too little, what kind of physical properties it has, what kind of chemical properties it has, and just tells you what's in your soil. From that point, you can then plan how much nutrients you need to apply. If you just randomly apply nutrients, you may actually already have too much of that nutrient, and now you're actually poisoning your plants by putting too much on. And nutrient needs are going to vary depending on the soil and your crop. It helps to know if your soil is building up salts, which you'll also know from testing. And tests will also let you know if your management is improving, degrading, or maintaining your soil. Soil testing is not something that just happens once. It's an every year thing, or at least every couple years, or anytime you have a specific problem come up. You should be testing the soil. It's very similar to like when people get sick, we often have blood work taken. That blood work tells us what elements and nutrients and minerals are high, low, and what could be going on in our body. It's the same thing for your soil. You need to do those soil tests to be able to test for those nutrients and minerals. So finally, we're on to the third aspect of soil health, which is the biological component. This includes the diversity of flora and fauna in your soil, the soil microbial activity, how your organic matter decomposition, the amount of organic matter in your soil, and all of those soil-borne pathogens. This diagram shows just how much life there is in 1 square meter of soil. And the majority of all those organisms are in your top 6 inches of soil. This includes your bacteria, fungi, actinomycetes, along with your nematodes, springtails, mites, insects, earthworms, and lots of other things. And all of those organisms help break down the organic matter or mineralize it, basically taking it from its solid form and turning it into nutrients that plants can then take up as food. So what are some soil biological issues? Well, here in New Mexico, our most common one is a lack of organic matter. We just have very, very low organic soils naturally out here, so we need to constantly be adding organic matter to our soils. We also, being that we're in a high desert environment, might be lacking biodiversity in our soils. So it'll take time to build up that biodiversity and build up the biological health of our soil. Also, when you till, that exposes those organic materials to the air, which has oxygen, so it causes them to oxidize and basically be no longer as beneficial to the microorganisms and the plants. Also, we often have the problem of poor ground coverage, just a lot of bare open ground. So how is soil similar to a human gastrointestinal system? Well, just like the human gut, soil systems require continuous microbial activity to break down carbon and release nutrients back into the soil, maintaining the carbon cycle. A lack of organic material like roots leads to reduced water holding capacity, and it's a continuous cycle. The less roots you have, the less water you can hold, which means the less plants can grow, which means you have less roots, which means you have less water holding capacity, and so on. And there are more microbes in a teaspoon of living soil than there are people on this planet. So, how do we maintain that life in our soil? Well, the main thing is that we always have to keep our soil covered. We need to protect it from the hot, dry air and the sun here in New Mexico, and pretty much everywhere should always keep their soil covered. Whether it's growing cover crops or mulching, do something to keep that soil covered and protected so that the organisms underneath can continue to live. So what is the secret to improving all New Mexico soils? Organic matter. More organic matter. It is an important soil material that we just don't have enough of out here. It holds the soil together, prevents erosion, it helps with water infiltration and aeration, adds nutrients for plants and organisms, and it's something that you just need to keep adding to your soils here in New Mexico. If you'd like to look at some of the details of the soil in your areas, you can go to this website, also linked below. And when you zoom in close on your property, it'll tell you some details such as the soil type, soil infiltration rates, water table depths, that kind of stuff for your area. What are some other management practices we can do to increase our soil health? One of them is reducing or modifying our tillage. Every time you till, it causes oxidization of your organic material and also breaks up all of those aggregates. You should be implementing crop rotation, not planting the same crop in the same area each year. Rotate the different types of crops and the types of roots they form to utilize the different columns or depths of your soil. Add organic matter and grow cover crops. Remember, you should always have something growing in your soil year-round. Thank you for watching our Backyard Conservation Workshop video on the Introduction to Soil Health. If you have any questions, visit our website at sanjuanswcd.com, and we hope to hear from you with any questions or comments you might have. Thank you.